Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the LPEA board meeting for July. Happy midsummer. I'll call the meeting to order at 9:06, and let's go ahead and start the meeting off with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Let's move into approval of agenda. As mentioned previously, I have one suggested modification. Does anyone else have any suggested modifications to the agenda? I don't see any hands. My suggestion will be that we add a section to board action, and we'll just call it D, if that's acceptable. And we will have potential action on board selection of delegate and a alternate for the NRECA regional meetings coming up in September. That's my suggestion. Kohler, do you have anything?
Yes, on the agenda under, let's see, 5A, the Finance and Audit Committee, it talks about the action required for a resolution. I couldn't find that resolution. Is that still an item we're going to be voting on? I think at the Finance and Audit Committee, they're going to postpone that until later in the year, but I don't know.
Tim, can you comment on do we need 5A1?
All right, 5A1.
Action, motion to approve capital credit retirements, and it's called Resolution 2024-08. And Kohler's suggesting that it might have been decided, in fact, to postpone that action.
Yeah, we are not asked. There's no recommendation from the FAC for a action at this board meeting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Kohler, does it make sense that we'll suggest that we remove that 5A little 1?
Yes, please.
Okay, any other suggested modifications?
Have you a motion for this yet or not?
No, we don't. Sorry, Tim. John Lee, question?
No, I was going to move to approve the agenda with the modification of delete 5 alpha 1 and add 5 delta.
Okay, so moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any more discussion on the agenda? Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda as modified, say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, we have an agenda. Let's move into member comments and concerns. Graham, will you go ahead and run through the preamble for us?
Yes. The board encourages comments about the cooperative from its members. The board will take all member comments under consideration, but it will not provide a response during the member comment period. The board asks that each participant's comments pertain to cooperative business. Those wanting to address the board during the public comment period are granted 5 minutes to address their topics. Lengthy comments to the board should be submitted in writing. Formal complaints must be filed in writing and submitted in compliance with applicable board policy. Comments from the public will be directed at the entire board and not at any individual. No personal attacks will be allowed. Failure to follow these requirements may cause the public comment period to be terminated. Copies of our cooperative policies and procedures on public comment and filing complaints are available on the cooperative website.
Thank you, Graham. Do we have anyone in the waiting room that would like to make a comment? And perhaps Janelle or Drew, you could help me look for that.
I see 3 people in the participant list. I don't see any hands raised.
Going once, going twice. All right, we'll move beyond member comments into.
We did have a fourth just join.
Oh, well, let's give them a second. If we're in member comment section, so if there's anybody in the waiting room that would like to have the floor and make a comment, this would be your time to raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to section 3 of the agenda, consent board items. Once again, if anybody feels the need to individually address any of those consent board items, we can remove them. If you just have questions or clarifications, we can address those. But we should probably have a motion to approve the consent board items before we start in on that.
Don't move by Kohler.
Thank you, Kohler. Any seconds? I see Rachel at second. Moved and seconded to approve the consent board items. Any discussion on that? Okay, seeing none. And warn me if there's something I don't see. Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All in favor of approving the consent board items as they are listed in your board packet, say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Is anyone opposed? Are there any abstentions? All right, thank you very much. Moving on to CEO and staff reports, I'll turn the floor over to Graham.
Thank you. Drew, could you share the, thank you. All right, getting excited. Next month is officially our 85th anniversary, so right around the corner. Go to the next slide, please. All right, again, all green check marks. I think, and some of these are perhaps even really green, as you can sort of see. 98% safety meeting attendance. You know, a lot of these numbers are even significantly above what the board's goals are. So go to the next slide, please. So as far as being safe and excellent in all we do, we experienced no lost time events, and we had LPEA placed third in the Hurt Man Rescue at the Utah Lineman Rodeo, and I would like to personally say that a lot of our rodeo team invited me to try and attend that, and I really appreciated the personal invitation that they invited me to go to that, and I unfortunately was not able to attend based on just how busy June was for me, but I really am proud of our guys for all the hard work, and it's a pretty impressive performance to place like that, so way to go, team. I also did want to bring up a couple of minor non-reportable incidents just to be transparent with the board. Is not sort of something we report out on every month, not very typical, but we did have a minor vehicle incident, right? It did involve a marked vehicle, so I just wanted the board to be aware that that happened. There were no injuries. It was a very minor incident, but obviously our vehicles are marked, so I just wanted to be transparent about that. We also had one non-reportable injury with no lost time, but I wanted to use that as a springboard to talk about how great our safety team is doing at sort of paying attention to specific metrics around injuries and tailoring training towards that. And they informed me that this is sort of a time of year when people can become slightly less attentive, and that can kind of lead to injuries, and they are being extremely proactive on a number of different fronts on getting out in front of those underlying drivers that can cause even smaller injuries like this. And so I really want to give a big shout out to all of our safety team, Elizabeth, Trent, Josh, all the people that really have made this for the longest time just be one green check mark with no lost time events on it. It's a lot to be proud of there. As far as regulatory compliance, we filed our reports with the Department of Labor as required by ERISA. As far as cyber incidents, we continue to have none. Way to go, Drew, and your team. Cybersecurity obviously has been a real big priority for us. as a cooperative, and sort of along those lines, let everybody know that I'm going to be in Washington on Friday to receive a briefing from the Department of Energy on cybersecurity, thanks to some grant funding that Drew and his team have secured. We've talked about that in previous board meetings, but they've sort of assembled the managers and CEOs of the awarded entities for a quick briefing this Friday, and so I'll be attending that. So also, way to go, Drew, and your team for prioritizing that and making that a reality. We also achieved all 10 goals on the NRECA's RC3 program, and I believe there's could you explain that a little bit more, Drew? I was getting ready to talk over, but isn't there like a next phase that we're already pretty far along on?
Yeah, there is. So this was the first 10, and over the next year, they're going to be setting 10 more goals that we're well on our way there. These are kind of baseline goals, but it's nice to know that we're meeting all those and looking good in their eyes.
And then finally on this slide, 5 major continuous improvement projects, our cost of service study. We have contracted with the vendor, and we're in the initial phase of data compilation to get that kicked off. So, Kirsten.
Yeah, a couple of things about the cost of service. So we're getting it kicked off. Is there a time frame on that? Yeah, as far as
Patrick, can you speak to that time frame?
Yep, we have started the process. We are just in initial data collection phases, Graham just noted, which that's a lot of opening up access to databases, and then we'll be doing manual transfers to them, and then they'll get into the reporting and data analytics towards the second, I would say right around the third, fourth quarter, second half of the year, so to speak. And then they expect to be able to have the study completed by year end. We're a little bit slower than they thought just because of resource constraints on their end, but they still feel like they can hit by year end, which is aggressive at this point in the game, but we're gonna trust that we can get it done.
okay, so I appreciate that. So end of year, so obviously budget for 2025 will be done by then, and revenue requirement will be done by then, and we will have, if we needed to identify it, if we need to do a rate increase by then. And the cost of service study doesn't have anything to do with the rate increase per se, but if you're going to have a rate restructure, and that's what the cost of service study helps you figure out, is are some classes of members more expensive or less expensive to serve, then you want to do that restructuring. My understanding is best practices is to do that restructuring separate from any rate increases. So what I'm hearing is it's possible we might be doing a rate change and then coming back afterwards to do a rate structure based upon the information from the cost of service study. Have I got that right?
I would say yes, Kirsten, right? Because as we've sort of talked a bit about and publicly available information, right? Tri-State has refiled to amend its rates and try and get its formula rate. So we're anticipating a rate increase from Tri-State in the middle of this year that we've already sort of anticipated and had in our last year's budget. And then we anticipate that changing again. It's a formula rate that's designed to true up. And so anticipate that we will try and have the metrics that go into that formula rate anticipated to understand what that impact is gonna be, and if we need to adjust our rates to reflect changes in that rate. Is that right, Patrick?
That's correct, Graham.
Okay.
So I would anticipate us probably having some sort of rate increase in January to reflect Tri-State's true up of their formula.
Okay, super. Thank you. So then the other thing about the cost of service study is, let me actually look at my notes, I'm sorry. Well, one of the things that we found in the last cost of service study, and then staff presented a net metering change of rate because of it, because they're more expensive to serve, or because of the load on the other members, the non-net metering members, and then we killed that. So do we have to wait until the end of this next cost of service study before we figure out the impact of that and revisit that net metering rate that was proposed by staff?
So Kirsten, my hope for the board is, as we sort of go into this energy transition, that we can compile as much data in quite a few different directions, so the board can have a very deep analysis on its rate structure, right? And so the rate increase, like we said, is likely to be tagged to whatever rate increase we anticipate coming out of Tri-State's formula, which will likely be at the end of the year. As Patrick said, it's unlikely that we would have the information from the cost of service study or a few other related consultant information that we're going to try and put together to have a complete picture for the board on the different rate allocations at that time. So like you said, best practice is to bifurcate those two. That's going to happen just based on the time it's going to take us to collect the data necessary to do that analysis and provide the board with a robust look at that.
I guess what I'm after, and maybe I'm doing a backwards way of getting to it, is we did the staff did the net metering recommendation based upon past cost of service study, and until there's a new one, so and we killed it very quickly and suddenly, and I'm wondering to know if we can revisit that, or do we? I don't think we have to wait, and I would like to see if we can revisit that now instead of waiting until 6 months from now, at least, before we're even able to address it again. I think it was a good recommendation from staff. I voted against it because the board had gone ahead and tried to change it, and I was voting for the original staff one. But I'd really like to see that revisited, and I don't see why we have to wait around for that. And that's probably a discussion item for the board, guys.
I'll chime in, and then Joe, I do see your hand. So, but we're working with Kirsten on the floor right now. My chime in on that would be, I would like to recommend that we put it in front of the FAC, and maybe just try and answer your question, Kirsten, is is it something that needs to be addressed within the next 6 to 9 months? I'm looking for overall impact and scale of that decision or lack of decision, and I think you're approaching it in a good way, which is we sort of tabled it or just declined it quite some time ago. Why aren't we looking at it again? And I think that's a fair question, but I think we should evaluate how important it is for us to look at it again. And I think that's largely a financial question, and we can try and get that in front of the FAC, and I'm sure Patrick can help out with what is the impact of making or not making that decision in the short term.
I think that's a great place for that discussion. Thank you. I look forward to that discussion. And I have one more question about the cost of service study, but if Joe has his hand up, I can wait for that. My third question about.
Yeah, let's bump it over to Joe and then come back to you, Kirsten.
Yeah, I had a question for Kirsten reading your comments, and I couldn't quite understand how we separate a rate increase from looking at our cost of service segments. And maybe I misunderstood what you were saying, but I don't understand how we can consider those in some kind of silo when they all have an impact on our budget. So if you can understand my question, if you can address that, I'd appreciate it.
I can, or I'm sure Patrick could, or Graham could, because it's about how the co-op model works. You want me to take it, you guys?
Yeah, I think you've probably done more research on it than I have, certainly when it comes to evaluating what the industry standards are.
So it's, Joe, it's kind of funky. It's sort of like we kind of get wrapped up around some dividing between when we allocate and when we retire capital credits. It's like that. They sound similar, but they're very different from each other. So in this case, the cost of service study isn't how much money do we need to raise to be able to do our business. That's what the rate increase is. The rate increase is, okay, we need this much money. How are we going to get this much money? Okay, it's going to be a 2% or a 3%. So the cost of service study is about, okay, how much does it cost to serve our industrials, for instance? So our industrials, because they are right next to substations and such frequently, they're not very expensive to serve. So we don't know what's called a margin, but we do a lower markup on that because they don't have as much administrative fee. So their rate is structured differently based upon the cost of service study. But again, it's the structure of it. It's not the amount. I'm trying to think, and Dan, maybe you can help me with some of the other classes that might have different kinds of costs associated with them. And it's the structure. The amount might be millions or it might be thousands, but the structure says, okay, this is how we divide that 1,000. This is how we divide that million, and it doesn't really change depending upon how much we needed to do. The cost of drop the mic there. The cost of service study tells us how we need to structure it so that we make sure that the people who are causing the cost are also then paying for that cost. Does that help, Joe? Did you see the difference between that and the revenue requirement, which drives the rate?
Yeah, it's it seems like it's kind of splitting hairs, but that does help. So thank you. And just one question: I'm at a different location than I usually am. Is anyone else's internet kind of getting a little wonky? I just got to check mine if it is. No,
Nothing unusual on my end, Joe.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kirsten.
Kirsten, did you have another one then?
If you're still thinking it's splitting hairs, it means I didn't do my job well, and we'll have some more talks about that, Joe, because it is a really important distinction. My third point or question on the cost of service study is about the money being paid to a vendor to have the words right here, but it's about something that's going to help us alleviate perhaps the red zone or be able to make.
Yeah, so there's an energy burden. So we have a consultant that we're engaging with, and so it has two, and we can maybe speak with this in a little more generality when we get to the budget analysis that the FAC has performed, but the same consultant with pretty broad abilities, right? And they've offered a couple of consultant information and all analysis that we're interested in at a staff level. One is a sort of an energy burden study that would sort of be complementary, we think, to the cost of service study, try and provide as robust a picture as possible to the board when it's evaluating future business models and structures of that nature. And then they're also have the ability to provide us with the, Dan, can you remind me what the name of this engineering analysis is that might help us with our solar constraints on the overloaded circuits?
Hosting capacity analysis.
Hosting capacity analysis. So they have the ability, those would be two separate analyses that this consultant can perform for us based on sort of the nature of their skill sets.
And it sounds like one of those has already been accepted, the one about the energy analysis, but the poverty burden or the energy burden has not been. That was kind of, we think the board's going to ask for that, so I don't know when we're going to have that discussion and be interested in that. And then I'm concerned about the first one. If we need it for stuff that's other than just about net metering, then it's great, but it's not an insignificant amount of money, and I would like to have a little discussion on that, and I don't know if that might need to be elsewhere or next month would be fine.
I mean, Dan, can you could probably speak to how we can utilize the hosting survey in various capacities.
Sure. The intention of the study they're going to be doing there is a deep dive into substation settings. You know, our understanding is at a certain point of you know, here's what we believe the relays do at these points. Are there different things, different settings of the relays we could use, or different upgrades we can make to the substations? It's a step beyond the normal screening process that's involved, which says no backfeed to the substations. You know, that's we reached that screening point, and that's why we have the red zones. And so now it takes a deeper dive, detailed study to say otherwise. Now, normally, if a large distributed generator came onto our system and wanted to install a 1 megawatt solar array, you put that burden on them, and you're like, okay, you go do this study and come back to us. You know, and that's probably not the right thing to do to somebody that wants to bring on a single 5 kilowatt thing on their roof. And so LPEA is looking at taking on that burden to do a system-wide study to look at those impacts, so that we can do a single comprehensive study that provides that answer across our system. Is what we're looking at there.
Yeah, and your opinion about the return on investment on that? I know it might be hard to put some real good.
It's your return is customer satisfaction. It's not dollars.
Okay, I'm for that. All right, thank you, sir.
Thanks. Dan Huntington, you're up next.
Yeah, maybe a little explanation for Joe would be that the service study does the cost of our facilities and the upkeep and maintenance of those, which comes back into the base charge to each different segment and individuals. And the rate is just for the electrons that we use. So two separate things. Just my take of it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's a good
Thank
different.
you.
Yeah, good different viewpoint on that, and a nice way to segregate the kind of the two aspects of our power supply and delivery system. Rachel.
Yeah, super exciting to hear about the add-ons to the cost of service study. Are those also slated for an end of year completion, or are they kind of staggering those?
Dan, have we gotten far enough down that road to sort of have some completion dates on that?
No, not for the hosting capacity study. We're just starting to get the proposal, so we don't even have a dollar amount, a firm dollar amount associated with it yet. Just rough guesses. So expecting a proposal though in the next, I'll say 2 to 3 weeks.
And Rachel, same answer, I think, for the energy burden part of that study. That's not contracted yet. I'm aware enough of it to know that the quick execution of that is a couple of months at the most. So it could be done ahead of that, but some of that depends on our ability to execute that contract to start with. Good enough, Rachel? On to Tim.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to learn about these things, but I want to sort of caution ourselves on the board here that these are efforts by staff to meet our strategic goals, right, as we've set out. That's our role. I think it's dangerous when we start trying to wade into the specifics or whether this is worth that return or that or not. That's not really our role here. This is all within the budget at this point. It's not an additional budget ask. We're trying to address concerns the board and members have given us previously with some real data. And so I guess my real question is just, can you relate how this effort comes to support our strategic goals and which one? And I think then we should just move out of this sort of detailed discussion, because I don't think that's really a board role. I think staff should be allowed to do what they think they need to do and gather the tools and information they need, as long as it's within the budget and the scope of our strategic goals. I think we're getting a little dangerously close to micromanaging here.
Thanks, Tim. I'll sort of speak to that. You wanted to sound like you want to know how I felt this sort of integrated with the strategic goals, right? And to sort of back up a bit on some of your policy and governance aspect of what you stated. I've been looking at, policy 103 and the delegation of authorities to the CEO and the delegation to engage cost of service consultants and similar consultants, which is sort of how I've viewed this energy burden as sort of in the larger context of rate and rate structure and rate design, to sort of help us have an analysis of that. And obviously part of the strategic goals of the current strategic goals and some potential future strategic goals that we discussed at our strategic planning session all have affordability components to that. So that is the strategic goal that is geared towards. And similarly, that same part of policy 106 that delegates to the CEO the authority to engage consultants allows us to engage with engineering consultants. And as we're sort of transitioning our energy supply model to be able to have more distributed generation on our system, as Dan sort of spoke to, we're looking for sort of this system-wide analysis, having, a lot of value and data in being able to sort of understand our ability to host different capacities on our system.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Tim. And to my opinion, the discussion that we've just been having is purely informational, not board direction, and maybe going a bit too deep because of that, but with no intention of having board direction that comes out of it. Thanks for bringing it up, Tim. Kirsten, your hand's up.
Hey, thanks for the reminder, Tim. I think one of the reasons that it remains board is, one, it is informational, but two, this expense showed up to me on the forecasted unbudgeted expenses report, which is not attached to the board packet, but is in the FAC directory. And I sent it to folks I sent it to folks last night so we could see it. And on it, it says the board views this as a method for meeting our power supply requirements. And I don't remember the board having that discussion. So if we're putting it as in the description of the board is doing it, then we should have that discussion or remind me of the discussion. I'm sorry, guys. And then secondly, this was an unbudgeted expense, and the board, one of the board's main duties, how we drive our strategy, is through our budget. And this was not budgeted at the beginning of the year, justifiably so. We didn't know about it, and now it needs to be budgeted. It needs to be talked about. So I don't think it's nitpicking or micromanaging to be talking about a six-figure unbudgeted item.
I think fair comment, Kirsten, and I think maybe we'll address that. How and when it exactly gets addressed when we talk about budget variance in the FAC report. But I mean, this is an appropriate time to bring it up because it was related to cost of service study.
Thank you.
Anything else on this slide? And thank you for the discussion, and thanks for wrangling us back in a little bit there, Tim.
All right.
Back to you, Graham.
Thanks, Ted. No other questions? Drew, if you could Advance the slide, thanks. All right, keeping the lights on. So complying with our fire mitigation plan, we replaced 11 poles and completed 5 Raptor protection installations and also installed fiber towards Viaceto for our Raptor recloser control. As far as our capital project schedule, we have completed 46% of our capital projects budget. And I think to sort of speak to why that is actually, even though we're sort of more than 46% of the way through the year, why that's actually still ahead of schedule is we build some flexibility into our capital projects budget because we can run into roadblocks, we can run into supply chain issues or permitting issues or things like that that might slow down certain projects. And so I think, you know, our real hope is to try and get over 80% of our capital projects budget completed for the year. And so that's what our actual schedule is. So by being at 46%, we really are ahead of getting that 80% goal completed by the end of the year. Is that accurate, Dan? I lose Dan. So
Yes.
anyway, yeah, okay. Other than that, continuing to meet our SAIDI and SAFE goals for June, which is pretty impressive considering the magnitude of the storms that we had at the end of June. We had 90 unplanned outages that were primarily caused by thunderstorms. And we had crews respond to 4 vehicle hit power poles. And as a leadership team, we're beginning to discuss what some ideas are that we can do to sort of heat map and track where these vehicle power pole collisions are occurring and if it might be worth changing the nature of our infrastructure in any specific location, or if these are just sort of random acts when you have thousands and thousands of miles of line like we do, that there's only, you know, it's bound to happen. So, Joe, you have a question?
Yeah, just curious on the replacement of the 11 poles. Is that kind of a typical amount that we would do during the summer, or is that high and low? And then what's the, I guess, the net when, because we're doing a lot of undergrounding projects, Turtle Lake and other spots. Just curious about this. Again, on the poles, is that a lot or is that a little? Can you shed any light on that?
Jerry, can you speak to that?
That is a lot. With the amount of capital work that we have going on top of the member jobs for new construction, having 11 poles being changed out in a month is an amazing number. Our used pole pile up in the top, we're having a hard time keeping it down to a safe level. Let's put it that way.
Well,
we have that many poles coming in. A lot of it has to do with make ready for fiber. We have to beef up our poles in a lot of places, make them taller. But a lot of them have been reject poles, which really go towards our fire mitigation.
Okay. And I guess a following question. So with the fiber, I'm assuming that we're getting a better handle on all the other folks who want to hang lines on our utility poles. So they're helping pay for some of this stuff.
Yes, in certain cases, it's our pole attachment agreement is very, very detailed, and there's a ton of specifics that go into every single possible application. So it's not a black and white. And I know that Ryan Wagner and Dan's group and a few guys from my group, they worked tirelessly, I mean, just endlessly to get that finalized, get it buttoned up, and got it out signed by the majority of our attaching partners. And it's really helped clear up the process.
Yeah. And do you, Jared, do you anticipate that, this heavy replacement, will it continue? I mean, do we have a lot of poles that are in bad shape, or is it just, they're just kind of timing out with their age?
So we do pole inspections on a certain percentage of our infrastructure every year. And with those, we usually average about 100 reject poles annually. We try to keep up with that. And then with the onset of the fiber boom, these make-ready poles have kind of doubled that effort with changing out taller poles, beefier poles. So it's kind of doubled the pole change outs for us. But we're doing a great job. We're maintaining and keeping up with all the work coming in.
Yeah, and it's all budgeted too, right? I mean, this isn't like big surprises or anything.
Right. And a lot of the costs, like you said, have been shared with shared or paid for in full by some of the attaching companies.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Kohler, see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So on the 90 unplanned outages, I was kind of interested in if it was caused by thunderstorms. I understand that we have equipment that, excuse me, resets, we get struck by lightning. So is most of this from wind, or why do the crews have to go to these outages? I thought the equipment kind of took care of itself on resetting.
Some of it does. We do have, like, reclosures do, line reclosures, electronic reclosures, and they will see lightning strikes and reset sometimes, but lightning it's a beast, and one lightning strike can blow every single fuse on an entire tap, for miles. And that's really what we see with these lightning storms is, it'll hit the ground somewhere, come back up the poles, and then dissipate through the wires and blow every fuse along that whole stretch. And then with our fire mitigation plan and SOPs, we're required to investigate and make sure that we don't have lines down on every single span, every tap, before we re-energize anything. So it does take a little longer, which these guys, they're doing an amazing job to keep our numbers low, and our response times are incredible. And it just, a lot of, with the storms, we also had some trees not breaking, but uprooting, because the ground is soft in some areas from the additional moisture. And so a little bit of wind is just uprooting them, blowing them into our lines, taking our lines down.
Mm-hmm. So a tree that wouldn't be identified as a hazard tree becomes a hazard tree because it would be outside of our right of way and stuff. But if it gets fully uprooted, right, it's not something that we necessarily anticipated to try and work with the landowner outside of the right of way to remediate on those.
We can't win.
Great. That's what I wanted to hear. That was a good educational thing for me. Thank you.
Yep.
Joe, I see you still have your hand up. Do you have a follow-up question?
No, but I might have to stop my video if my thing gets wonky. I'm here. I'll just have to do that. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Moving on to sourcing clean, low cost, lowest reasonable cost local power. We're going to have, of course, an update on power supply strategy and executive session. And then as far as our projects, we were able to do our energized testing on Sunnyside in preparation for it to be turned on in July. And obviously we hosted a ribbon cutting that almost everybody was able to attend. Joe, I hope you're feeling better after that. But, I think everybody personally witnessed that was a pretty successful and enthusiastic event. So I appreciate everybody's attendance there. Any other questions on that? Move to the next slide. Right, being a trusted community partner, achieving improvement in overall member satisfaction. John Kenny, and give him a shout out for having 24 members show up to his heat pump water heater technology webinar. Great job, John, and way to have some good two-way interactive communication with our members. Also, Emily Missildine and Steve Smith hosted a Sunnyside Solar Program webinar that had 63 members attend. Great job for the two of them, and a lot of interest there. Kirsten, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I sure do. You know, Emily came over and talked to the CDC, the Pagosa Springs CDC, yesterday, and it was very helpful, and I appreciate that. I mean, she talked about the solar. Thank you.
Yeah, and sort of along those lines, Emily hosted a pretty well attended. I had a meeting to get to at 5:30 last night, and so she was sort of in the middle of a Sunnyside kind of paperwork assistance program here, and had a lot of good interest in that. It was well attended, and she told me that she's going to have one of those in Archuleta County to help interested Archuleta County members get their questions answered in person, get their paperwork filled out in person in the next week or two. I don't know that she had a specific date for it just yet, but we're going to have one of the similar paperwork night in Archuleta County that Emily's putting on. Rachel.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to ask how that went last night. And just wanted to, I don't know, thank you all for putting that on. I know that, I mean, we hear this all the time in my nonprofit that it's complicated at times to fill paperwork out and confusing. And so having those, we call them warm handoffs or navigation support, is huge. So way to go the extra mile. I also just want to applaud you all. It was available in Spanish, and we reached out to our Spanish speaking community members, and they were stoked to know that this was an option. And also it's kind of they felt like one of the really exciting opportunities to engage with LPA, which they haven't necessarily felt as much. So appreciate, I think it was Amanda and Fourcore for reaching out and asking for that connection. And then just to kind of build off of this a little bit, I didn't quite know where to throw this, but I wanted to put forward that the Energy Outreach Colorado is coming down in August, I believe, August 18th, 19th, 20th to our region. They have a new executive director. So these are folks that provide energy assistance programming, is my understanding, across the state. And anyways, they're doing a town hall because they want to, specifically on energy burden, they want to understand what's going on and how different partners experience that. I think I put up Emily's name as someone to speak for LPEA to talk about some of the programs. But that's going to be at LPEA in our conference room. And so Chris Lopez, who's helping to organize it from Chaffa, wanted to extend an invitation to all of the board members to attend. And so I'll send an email follow up, but just wanted to give the context to that. And I know that energy burden is kind of a newer topic, or not a newer topic, but a newer term to us for a topic we've long been concerned about. So I think it'll be a great educational opportunity and experience. And I do know that Energy Outreach is going all across the region. So they'll have, well, they have one event here. I know they're trying to do some stuff in Cortez, and I believe also in Pagosa.
Thanks for that update, Rachel. Appreciate you sharing that information. Kirsten.
Yeah, the event is at the Archuleta County Library, August 6th or 8th. So it is set, and there is been some outreach on that. There was an article in the paper this week about the Archuleta Health Department split off from the La Plata Health Department, and they've actually increased their membership. And how they've done that is not try to reach people through mail or ads, but try to reach them through organizations. So like through Healthy Archuleta or through the well, in this case, I'm going to suggest the health department. So those are good places for us to do outreach about the solar too. And I have some other ideas. I'm not sure who I'm supposed to get that to. Is that you, Dan?
Or me? You can just give it to me, and I can route it. Yeah. So I'm happy to receive that. Yeah.
Of course, it should be through through you. Okay, super, thank you.
All right, just taking a few notes. Holly.
Great. Thank you so much for your work on this. Dan, just to follow, or I mean, Graham, just to follow up a little bit on what Kirsten just asked. I was trying to get an organization in contact with you to do one of those utility of the future, basically presentations.
Yep.
I followed up with him this week and he hasn't heard from you guys. So what is the process and procedure for doing that?
So I asked Dan about this, right? And Dan, you said that you typically have them reach out to you. And so I would say put them in contact with Dan directly, right, Dan? Is that?
Yeah, that'd be great. If you, Holly, just have them email me, that'd be perfect.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Oh, and one more question, please, sir. I know that the Sunnyside application process opened on July 1st. What is the participation or the interest rate so far?
I think we have approximately 200 people, 200 applications for both the general public pool and the income qualified pool. Is that right, Amanda? Do you have numbers on that, or Dan?
Yep, that is correct. Although we do expect that there's about 25 members that are duplicates who have applied to both. And so I would say about 175 per program.
Thank you.
And so just sort of, I think, yeah, thanks. Yeah. Any other questions on that? All right. Strengthening our partnerships and increasing stakeholder engagement. We had a biannual Solars Installers meeting conducted by Steve Smith and Cassie Klausner, and focused on Tesla inverters and adjustments in the area, especially where interconnection limits are in place. And we were able to get 16 members off the solar interconnection wait list. I think that was a big accomplishment by our team to work through that. And I think contextually, right, Dan, and we sort of went over the numbers a little bit yesterday at LT, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was between members who were able to get their entire allotment and members who were able to get a sort of a modified allotment. I think the actual number is 19 out of approximately 40. Is that right, Dan?
That's right.
So we've knocked that wait list almost in half, right? We're going to stay vigilant around this, right? Because the end of the line will keep filling into, when we sort of move people off the front of the wait list line, we know there's a lot more resources for us to put towards this, but to sort of come close to knocking that number in half like this, I think was a big accomplishment for Steve and his teams. I want to give them a big shout out. Joe, so you got your hand up?
Yeah, and maybe this is for Dan. Can you give a brief explanation of why this worked positively? Is it because of the storage? And what kind of modifications did we have to make? And how difficult were those to accomplish to get the savings here, or the get them to go back on?
Right. Joe, some of this is going to be a one-time win for us. Part of what happened was we increased our the limit from a 90% of daytime loading to 100% of daytime loading. So we upped our limit to the full 100%. And the other thing we did is reviewed another year's worth of actual loading information. So we were going off of October. I guess we do it every 6 months. So we were going off of October actuals, and then we look at it in the fall and spring, the shoulder months. And so now we had actual April data, whereas when applications come in, let's say we have a 10 kW system, we're assuming we're going to have 10 kW of capacity added. Sometimes there's tree shading, or it's not at an optimal angle, and maybe we assume the full 10 comes on, but in April we actually get the actuals, and then we can reconcile to that. And it's like, well, we were assuming 10, but it looked like only 9 showed up, so there's an extra kW over here, and everything adds up to provide a little bit more headroom to squeeze a few more people in. So those are the major attributing factors there.
So it's, I mean, it's pretty complicated. overall, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we're gonna be evaluating every 6 months to see where things lie, and if there's, yeah, new people move onto the system, so there's more additional daytime loading that comes on. And so we're always gonna be gauging to how the system is sitting there.
Great, and I appreciate that members know that this is an ongoing process and that we're really looking at it, because that's what the board had asked for, and I know staff wanted to do that too. So thank you.
John. You're still muted, John.
Thank you. This is a question for Dan. Do you have an update for a couple ideas have been batted around, particularly around zero export or time of use export configurations on inverters? Do you have an update on the current LPA thinking around that one?
Yeah, Graham and I have been working on a proposal around that, and it's going to be a tiered approach of various different things, as you're mentioning there. I need to carve out some more time sit down with Graham and go through that again, and we'll bring that to your attention after we get a chance to look through that. But I think that's imminent. I don't, there's going to be some things that move the needle. With us being all the way up to 100%, even non-exporting can create problems. So a lot of this is going to hinge upon the study that NREL can do for us, or consultant can do for us to try to work through. Can we go past that 100% limit? So I wouldn't expect major movement until we get data back from that study there.
Great. And then just without trying to pin you or your team down, do you have a rough timeline of when we might see that in market?
I hate to say, because I haven't got that proposal back from the consultant yet. So let us get that back, and I hope it answer that question for you next month, John.
That's fine. Thank you. No more questions.
Rachel.
Okay, I think this is above my pay grade. Well, I know it is. But I've been listening to this fascinating podcast called Catalyst. And one of the last episodes I listened to, I'll share with everyone, shared it with Nicole, is about virtual power plants. And I thought some of the interesting things that it presented as we look to this future is kind of this disconnect or conflicting kind of vantage point between solar installers who are really like interfacing. This is all for kind of net metered products, who are, interfacing with the public and they need to make a sale. And utilities and they're making a sale, and they're kind of pitching it on many things, the values, et cetera, but also a cost savings proposition. And then a utility company, when we think about rooftop solar, especially in the virtual power plant world, how it's thinking about it more as how can it benefit the system at large, and how do we tap into that? And just kind of this interesting tension between the solar installers who are your interface and them kind of like, it was just kind of talking about, do we have anything in place with our solar installers here? Or is there a conversation going on where it's almost like a co-creation of them, not even the messaging, but the product or the service, so that as they're kind of queuing people up to put on solar and probably most importantly, batteries, they're kind of leading into, hey, this might not just be about you, this might be about serving the utility, which might mean a little loss of control, but here would be the greater benefit of that. Does that make sense? Yeah, Rachel, and that's where our biannual solar installer meetings really play a big help. So that gets us messaging the things correctly, because the solar installers tell us very clearly, and we understand that they are the voice. They're talking to the customer directly there, and it helps to arm them with the right words and an understanding of why things are the way they are. It's not perfect by any means, but it certainly gives them the understanding of why we have policies the way we do, and what they can do to maximize the number of systems they install out there. And it's like, hey, we can look at these settings, or if we can do this, may not be the optimal thing for you, but now you can put in 50 more systems. And so those are
when John was referring to non-exporting systems, that could be one of those things that we can do out there. So, yeah, it's just a good two-way communication that I think helps enable that.
Cool, thanks. And it seems like it's a really good piece of social infrastructure to have in place in anticipation of the future and the complexity of things, just to have those, honestly, that mechanism and relationships built. So.
Thanks, Rachel. Next target is positioning LPEA as an industry leader through public and member engagement. Cassie Klausner and I went to the Colorado Geothermal Summit up in Montrose last month. We learned a lot of amazing information about what's a really exciting new clean energy technology that potentially have a lot of applications in our service territory because of the nature of our resources here. So really excited to find out more about that. And I've got some potential follow-up geothermal events that I'm planning to attend here in next month or so. Also, Kevin Camp and Alex Mottler went to the NPAC Jolt conference. So glad to get them out there and sort of working with the people in our region. And then finally, big, exciting two-way communication improvement for us is that we launched our chat service via Smart Hub, so our members can interact with our member service representatives, not a outsource, not a chat bot, not anything like that. Our actual human member service representatives here alongside with the phone and email options. And so because it's a new program, we don't have a lot of data on it, but I believe Elizabeth has some anecdotal information that she can share about that. Elizabeth?
Absolutely. We actually do have data and some anecdotal information. Chat services launched on June 24th. It is not widely accepted yet or being used, but we're excited about it. And we do know that members are liking it for just kind of quick information needs. So for June, here's some just overall stats. We had 2,795 calls come into the member service center, 123 emails and 11 chat conversations. That was just the last 6 days of June. And for July to date, we've had about 1,700 calls, 105 emails and 10 chats. So we haven't really publicized this a lot. We're just kind of making sure we're working through the bugs and that our member service staff know how to use this feature, but we're hoping it becomes more adopted.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Anything else on this slide? Kohler.
Yeah, I saw an article in which one of our larger members got a pretty good sized grant for geothermal production. Is that something that we're aware of that can benefit us?
Yeah. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
Yeah, we're well integrated with that and been talking about that in fact, we even helped them with the application process on it. So yeah, definitely involved with it.
Cool. Thank you.
Tim.
Two things. Just going back a moment to Kohler's question. I think Amanda sent something out after last month's board meeting around that geothermal grant.
Correct.
I'm not sure if that was the same thing or not. Anyway, Kohler, if you didn't get it, that might help answer your question. The other thing was I was just curious about what a NPAC and Jolt conference, is that like a energy drink they went to, or I'm being a little facetious there, but I'm curious about what was the focus and result of that, and just as informational, I'm curious.
Yeah, a lot of that's state legislators, policy making type of conversations, around the energy markets. And so when Kevin and Alex go there, they learn about what could be coming in different legislative ventures. Tim, I think it was very, very similar to the conference that you and I attended in Paonia several years ago. I think this is the predecessor to that.
Okay, all right. So that's pretty helpful. And Kevin and Alex, what role do they play in LPA?
Mhm. So Kevin is one of our energy management crew there that really focuses more on policy and trying to get the right structure and information to our members. You know, really, you know, trying to consolidate all the grants and the tax credits and everything and present that to them. And Alex is our basically our DERM specialist. So he's watching a lot and watching for when the peaks occur and deploying our DERMs at the right time is one of his main functions.
Great. Thanks for that info. That's helpful. Appreciate it.
Any other questions on this slide? All right, Drew, let's go to the next one. So there is Alex and Kevin at the JOLT conference. You can see the lightning bolts. And of course, you know, everybody that was able to attend their great Sunnyside opening. You know, such a beautiful day. So, all right, next slide. Patrick, I'll turn this over to you.
Morning, everybody. June was a successful month, I would consider, from a financial performance standard. We covered the ground we lost in May to budget and then some. Operating margin was better than budget by approximately $460,000. That was driven primarily by better than budgeted O&M expenses. We were better than budget by about $300,000. Other expenses, we were better by about $80,000. And top line revenue was better than budget by approximately $70,000. Residential sales were up about 2% and small commercial 3%. Large industrial was still off 6%. We looked into large industrial, having analyzed some of those accounts. One of our key accounts, which is a major contributor to this revenue line item, has essentially just become a bit more efficient. So we foresee their load just being a little bit lower than budget going forward. And this has been the case through most of the year. So June was successful. We do, as has already been discussed, there are a number of budgeted expenses with our transition that are yet to come. We expect to see margins come more in line with budget as we move forward throughout the year, but we'll take the excess variance at this point in the game. We did briefly talk about capital projects. Capital projects, I feel like that's kind of the major highlight in the balance sheet. CWIP, which is capital work in progress, is pacing significantly ahead of the prior year, which goes to credit Dan and his team, Jerry's folks, for being able to execute projects at a good clip. A lot of time, these guys face a lot of resource constraints in the form of just contractors or internal resources being constrained, or they run into weather. So you've got a situation where a lot of things have come together to allow them to get a lot more capital work done. So June was successful. I don't have any other comments and would open up for questions.
It's like Tim's hands up first on my chart.
Thank you. So Patrick, thanks. We did look through some of these at FAC, but it always takes me a little more time between then and the board meeting to peer through the numbers a little closer. And it seems to me that for the year, the small commercial has been kind of on a rise, not huge, but it's performing, I think, better than budget, if I read this correctly. And I'm just curious if there's anything Dan or anyone else sees in that regard that is some sort of change, or is that just some sort of seasonal aspect or whatever? And just curious about that.
I would have to dig into that one a little more, Tim. Nothing really comes to me top of mind on that, but that's largely driven by oil and gas field operations, not their major compression stations or anything. And it's, some of it deals with tourism levels too, and how busy downtown sectors are and hotels are as well.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Kirsten, see your hand up next in my queue.
Yeah, thank you. So this is going to be, these are questions in the appendix part of your report, Patrick. There's some stuff on page 85 I just need you to explain to me, but I don't need you to explain it to me at this meeting. I think I'm doing my math wrong. So if you could just get back to me on those questions that.
I'm ahead of that one. I've got that for you, Kirsten, so I'm happy to respond to that.
Sure, go ahead.
This is in regards to the revenue variance. Is that if I'm on the right page?
Yeah.
So in your mathematics, you included residential, small and large commercial. We do have other components that fall into that. There's sales for resales for other, there's irrigation, there's street lights. And I believe there's a small variance beyond that. I haven't done a full reconciliation. But that just based on the math that you presented versus the actual revenue line, those are the most obvious things that I noticed.
So at the bottom of that page, when you break it, it says breaking out of income. It has residential, large industrial, large commercial, and industrial. And you're saying that there's a lot more. There's another 50,000 more in the variance that we're not seeing because the variance wasn't that much. You reported the variance is 79,000 revenue variance. But when you sum those three things, it's 27,000. And so the rest of that other seems like a pretty big other that you're not including in your breakout. Breakout's helpful, but it's not that helpful if you're not going to break it all out, I guess.
I appreciate that feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll look at that. Yeah. Like I said, I need to go in and reconcile that, and that, with a little bit more detail, we can look at what that might look like.
Again, I don't need that now, but since you started answering it, I think I could follow up more. Super, we can do that later. On page 86, you talked about it. We received a large warranty credit from a vendor due to units failing prematurely. Can we talk a bit about that?
This is a meter issue. Dan might have, this was something that the billing team and his team worked through. Dan might have a little more information on the actual warranty credit that we received, but it was just a standard warranty, which was good. I'm gonna have to give a lot of kudos to Dan and his team because they really dug in and they recovered this. And I feel like it was at risk for some point in the game. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give a shout out to Rachel and some of Dan's team for really getting after it.
Yeah, this was, 100% Rachel. We were noticing, I would say, premature failures on some of our meter modules, and this is more of the AMI communication module. And she went through there and basically said, no, this doesn't look right. You need to guarantee this, and really negotiated a good credit if a failure rate exceeded a certain amount above our expectations, that they would either discount modules or pay them for free and include an additional credit to for the labor and the installation there. And so that's what that credit was that came back to us, was a actual credit for us for the labor to install and retrofit some of these modules. And now they are and we're seeing that of a certain vintage of where the failures are occurring that we're working our way through. But so I feel we've mitigated that risk of premature failures with this crediting mechanism.
What does that look like to our members when their meter fails?
Mm-hmm. And so what the metering is not failing, the communication back to LPEA is. And so that means we have to go out there and manually read the meter, which of course costs us money. So we want to replace that. So when we go out there and do the manual read, we'll do a meter exchange. So what that looks like to the member is about a 2 to 3 minute power outage while we exchange that meter.
All right. So that's actually pretty good. We know from people we have to do individual meter reading on that. That's an expensive proposition, going out and reading a meter.
And it usually just involves one manual meter read, and at that time we're doing the meter exchange.
Yeah. Okay. So it's more costly than just the meter that we're getting replaced, right?
Yes, yeah, the meter we're replacing, the meter module that we're replacing, because that's an individual component that we can replace. Then that labor, and that's what that credit is covering, is that labor aspect.
Oh, I see. I missed that it was covering the labor, because that's probably the higher part of the whole thing.
Yeah, it was because we were basically threatening to leave and look at different AMI systems, and so they stepped up to the plate.
All right, good for you guys.
No,
Super.
it's great job by Rachel and her team to sort of get that taken care of and mitigate the impact on the members, both in the cost perspective and the outage perspective, the reliability perspective. It's a really fantastic solution. I'm glad Patrick brought it to our attention. Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm amazed almost every month by looking at our new member list and how many names there are on there. It seems to be almost an astounding number. And I'm wondering, is this actual growth? And is that growth helping with our revenue picture? Is it possible to answer that?
Joe, there's members coming, there's members going. And so those are in line with what our budgetary projections are.
I mean, is it kind of a wash? How many are going and how many are, coming and going and going and coming? If I can quote an old movie, but I mean, does that kind of wash out in the end?
There's definitely net gains.
There is, okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so the net gains, and Patrick, then would that help our revenue picture then? Is that part of this?
Yeah, it contributes, right? I think we have about 1.5% from a historical growth factor, and that's held pretty steady year over year. That's integrated into the budget though. What type of volatility is around that? I wouldn't consider it huge, but
okay,
as with any forecasting or budget mechanism, it's less than precise sometimes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Kirsten?
Yeah, back to my financial questions. Again, this is an appendix. So looking at page 86, where we have the tables on the summary income statement and key financial metrics, we see them both in year to date. I can see not doing the key financial metrics on a monthly basis because that gets confusing. Any chance we can have the summary income statement have a column for the monthly on that? This helps me track it. Or is this a question I should take to FAC to request that?
Yeah, I can certainly look at it and see what kind of load is, and then we maybe have FAC just take a look at what the actual poll effort is from staff and what the time commitment is and what the value proposition is. I'm happy to look at that.
That'd be great. And I can take that question to FAC. I just happened to be looking at it last night and saw it, and I was like, gosh, I wish I had that monthly. Super.
And for me, Kirsten, we want to accommodate what the board needs to make educated decisions to fulfill their fiduciary obligations. So looking at, what's the value gain from the information and how you receive it versus what the effort is. It's kind of how I view those things. So always happy to look to evolve information that we present to you guys, especially if it becomes more efficient, and easier for you to use. And if we can get some efficiencies on our end, putting it together, that's what we're looking for.
And I have some more questions in finance, but I see Joe and Rachel have their hands up, so I'll wait and go back in line.
Joe? Oh, Joe maybe just didn't put his down from before. Rachel?
This is just a check for understanding, but to Joe's question about how many new consumers in the performance statistics, which is, gosh, I don't know how you tell pages in the board book thing, but at the very end in the June financials packet, performance statistics part 1 at the very right-hand side, page 95. It says year-to-date consumer increase. Is that net increase? That's what I've always understood it to be.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so Joe, there's a place to look for that info. Thank you.
Thanks for pointing that out, Rachel. Appreciate it. Kirsten?
Yeah, and back to my financial questions. Page 86 still, so in the conclusion.
Kirsten, it's really hard to hear you. I don't know how far you are from your microphone, but I'm having trouble hearing you.
How about that? It's my phone. How about that? Is that better?
Yes.
A little bit.
Okay. I also don't have much of a voice today. Sorry, guys. It's become my new life is not having a voice. So on page, can you hear me before I bother trying this? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm on page 86 and in the conclusion, and I always appreciate these conclusions. I do have a question about the conclusion that the expect positive budget variance to diminish because of timing. Because when I think about the things that are timing, administrative and general cost isn't so much timing, because that was the reasons for that was the key staff position and the meeting and travel and training, and I don't know if we're going to make up for that travel and training. So I wasn't quite, I guess I appreciate the conclusion, but I was wondering if you could, Patrick, just talk a little bit more about what's making you think it's a timing thing, because based upon what I saw here, I wasn't able to draw that conclusion, so I just need to be educated.
So it's a complicated stew of many components that fall into it. A few things, legal fees, consulting fees, those are currently pacing better than budget. I foresee that positive margin going away. The labor component, that's like you said, that's a little tougher one to get your hands around, because ultimately we have a key staff position that's empty. Forecasting when that would be filled, hard to say. We do have recruiting efforts and some other things that might come in, and then we have staff support that might come in to help offset the loss of that position. So I would foresee that impacting G&A to some degree. In general, though, it's not just general administrative that's driving this. For instance, in June, we had in operations and maintenance, we had budgeted for approximately 50,000 in unexpected repair expense. That didn't come to fruition. On a probability basis, we expect to see some unexpected repairs. There's line locates, there's a number of things. And then with the energy transition, we have this whole budget variance that's stewed in that's going to push some pressure on this positive budget margin variance as well.
Okay. Super. I really appreciate you taking that extra time for me.
Absolutely.
I have some more finance questions. I don't know if anybody has a hand up. No, it doesn't look like it. Okay.
Could I just say one thing too, that, and my numbering might be a little different than yours, but there is a forecast for the rest of the year that was also produced as part of this packet. So it's an adjusted forecast. So you might look at that and also get some insight.
Okay.
So that's on page,
The one that starts at page 90?
Yes. So, that's the summation of kind of what Patrick was saying there, and it's the best guess at this point. It's what's been done so far and what we have as our budget through the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I do have some questions on page 90 when I get to that. I really appreciate you pointing that out to everybody. Can I go back to page 88 and actually before 88, on page 86, since this is about variances and such, when we did the initial budget back last year, did we assume in that budget that net metering rate change was going to be in there, and does not having that in there affect this variance at all? I don't know if we budgeted for that or not, for that revenue.
We did budget for that revenue, but I would consider it fairly immaterial on the total impact.
Okay, that makes, yeah, I wasn't thinking it was a big amount, but we did budget it, but it's a little bit. Super, thank you. And page 88, sales expenses. Remind me what sales expense is, because this is a big, 77% is a big difference there.
That is primarily demonstration and sales expenses. So could be a demonstration for a heat pump or an efficient water tank, and this is the accounting and finance person trying to describe what the efforts are on the ground. But that's primarily what that is. And there's also advertising expense. Advertising is the smaller piece of that. We are basically pacing behind on demonstration and sales expenses. So I think there's definitely some forecasted catch up on that. As far as specific events, I could not comment to anything that's on the horizon, but that's what that's made up of.
Okay, so member education? When
Yeah,
you
a little
say-
bit, a little bit, yeah.
Okay, what is a demo other than member education? I'm just trying to, again, I just don't understand sales expenses.
Well, you know, it is in the glossary of terms too. That's on, that's provided, you know, so glossary of terms says these represent expenses incurred by the member experience and billing teams to serve and educate our members. So specific information beyond that, maybe you could just ask offline, but.
Okay, so it is member, so as I stated, it is about member experience or member outreach.
That's what the glossary says.
And then Patrick said, no, but it's about other stuff too. So I'm just trying to understand the other stuff that might not be in the glossary.
Well, I mean, we had a presentation on the community solar garden last night. Whether that falls into those expenses, I need to verify that. But that could be an example of something, right? That was last night in house about the Sunnyside 1 community solar participation. So that would be an example I would think of, Kirsten.
Okay, super. I appreciate that. That. Also on page 88, interest on long-term debt, 12%. We're paying 12% less than we anticipated, which is great, but why?
We have more cash from our Salem subsidiary, and then we also had a rate increase that has brought more cash to the table. And we're not, right? And that's being deferred, but we actually receive the cash. We defer that revenue. It's sitting on the liability side of the equation, but the rate increase does increase our cash position. So being able to pay for things in cash rather than the line of credit is that we get savings in interest expense, right? It's pretty straightforward.
This is the long-term debt item, which I would think we already had our long-term debt in place, or were we anticipating having to take out some long-term debt that we did not take out, and that's
right. Yeah, we had budgeted. That's right.
Okay, cool.
I need to just jump in because we're like 30 minutes over on this section, and we're doing a lot of pretty deep dive here, and I know sometimes these questions can be answered in email and offline and prior to the meeting. Keep going with what you think is applicable, but also try and respect that this is taking longer than it normally does.
Yeah, I appreciate that reminder, and I'd like to hear from actually other board members if this is out of line, or if you guys are interested and have done this deep dive also and have raised these kinds of questions. If you have not, and I'm the only one, and you guys don't care, then I'll stop.
I'll weigh in. I think you're way over the line here. If you want to get these kinds of detailed questions answered, your email was an appropriate forum, and if you had submitted that with enough time to do it in response, then those are reasonable questions. But I think taking 12 people's time and the public and staff time for this level of detail is beyond what's appropriate clarification.
I appreciate that way. Anybody besides John?
There's also the context of the FAQ. You know, we have an opportunity each FAQ where we review the financials, including the previous month. You attend that almost regularly, and none of these questions came up there. I tend to agree with John, and I think there's a couple of things here that you've pointed out that are helpful in terms of how did a particular calculation come about that may or may not be accurate. But to get down to the weeds and some of these things which are already in a glossary or could have been answered, I think it's taking a lot of time. That is probably more valuable looking at a higher level, and the lower level in the weeds details could be addressed at FAQ or through an email, which is, I think, what many of us do. I send regular emails to Patrick or Graham to ask specific questions, and they're always very good about getting back to me. And I don't think there's a timeliness to this. These could be answered in the next week if need be. So I tend to agree with it. Thank you.
I appreciate that feedback too.
Joe Lewandowski.
Yeah, I guess I respectfully disagree with John and Tim. As a board member, I'm not always able to attend FAC meetings, and this is really our only opportunity once a month to get this kind of information. Yes, could Kirsten have submitted those any earlier? Probably, but we got to remember that we really don't get the final draft of our agenda packet until Friday. So, I'm not expecting staff to work all weekend to answer these kind of questions. Is it too deep? Perhaps. Maybe Kirsten, you could edit a little bit more, but if you have these questions, I ask questions that a lot of questions too. So I don't want to be shut down to ask those, because again, I don't think we should try to judge our meetings on what the time schedule says on the agenda, but on the information that we need to fulfill our fiduciary duty.
Thanks, Joe. And I think that brings it to a good point, and I think that's kind of the metric that I would like to see used here is, not that any of the questions don't deserve getting answered, but are they for the full board, or are they informational for an individual board member? And if they're going to be presented to the whole board, are they relevant to decisions that we're going to make as a full board? If they're informational, I think it's important to make that clear and state that, and then we can push a little harder and say, hey, well, we're over time. Let's not do the informational stuff right now. Let's make sure we have time for things that require board action. And if we have time, we keep doing the informational stuff. But let's really try and focus on the things that, the information that needs to be shared with the full board, that's going to push us to making the decisions that we're responsible to make. And certainly, I think you're well aware of this, Kirsten, and everyone else, that staff is ready and willing to answer all of these questions. Doing it on short turnaround is tough, and doing it sort of live, as we sometimes find out, is also tough. So I think staff can take this liberty as well. I'd like to answer that later. I can put some time into that and get you a response. And I know we do that occasionally. So let's be ready and willing to continue to do that. If we're digging in really deep, let's just push things off where they can be, push things off, and get those responses to the individual board members or the full board, when they're available. So how you feel now, Kirsten?
So good. So I'll skip my questions on page 90, because that's more of a, please refresh me on all of this. But when you do give that answer, please give that answer to all the board, because any questions, I would hope that the whole board cares about the answers. And actually, any question that any board members ask anybody, I think should be made public to all the boards, so that we know, so that we're all on the same page, that we know, okay, this is what this guy's interested in. These are the kinds of answers they're getting. Questions that aren't seen by everybody doesn't help the rest of us learn. So
yeah,
I can go.
Sorry, I was going to say, Kirsten, for your email, we do try to answer everything in writing and respond to the whole board.
But I think I just heard that somebody was saying that they make calls or they do emails, which is great, and they need that information. But if one board member is asking about it, I would assume we should all be asking about it and should all know. So maybe that's something to talk about. So continuing on the, so I'm going to skip page 90. On page 101, I got a little freaked out about seeing the Ford Mustang Mach-E until I looked it up, and it's an SUV, because I was just seeing you, Graham, racing around in a sports car, and it's not a sports car. So I was really glad.
So case in point, Kirsten, I really don't think that's a relevant part of this board meeting.
A little levity? Okay. Got it.
Yeah, when people have already suggested that we're going way over time, and you're spending our time on levity. I mean, so, really try and focus in on the stuff that you think we all need to know.
Okay, got it. Sorry, bad joke.
Good joke, bad timing. And you're on mute.
That was the end.
Okay. Sorry to end on that note. Onward.
See, Joe appears to have his hand up.
No, accidental.
Okay, accidental. All right. go ahead and go to the next slide, prepare for the future. No updates on broadband, particular this month. Would like to call out that our operational awareness platform doubled its predictive accuracy and significantly reduced its testing error percentage. So that's a big increase. Not particularly a lot of information to talk about as far as the grant awards. They're all sort of progressing paperwork wise, but nothing particularly new to report out. Any other questions on this slide? If not, any questions on the appendix? I don't see any. We'll go ahead and wrap up the dashboard for this month if there's no other questions.
All right. Okay. Oh, Tim's
Tim
hands up.
has his.
Yep. Can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I try and keep notes and go back and forth, but you went through that real quick there, Graham.
Oh,
So
sorry.
I was just curious about the Prepare for the Future, the USDA grant, that New Era grant that was not awarded. Is there anything that we learned about that could help in future grant requests or seeking new grants and so forth? I mean, it's not clear why we didn't get awarded. Maybe you don't have insight into that, but I'm just curious what we have learned or could learn, because from my perspective, I think there's a lot more potential for, or there's potential for more grants in the future, and I would like us to be able to take advantage of that.
Dan, do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, we're going to be reflecting on that one with our consultant that helped put that package together. And a lot of it comes down to how big of an ask you make. You know, you don't want to leave money on the table. You want to ask for as much as you can, but sometimes the ask gets too big. And what happened in this case is that the funding appropriation got greatly reduced to this particular pot of money. And I think the fact that we won a PACE award impacted our ability and likelihood to receive this one as well. So I think those are contributing factors. I think it was a very good project that was set forth, economical. It just, didn't make the cut. I think they were trying to possibly spread the wealth, and we'll be reflecting with our consultant on that and see if we can confirm that in any way. She's got good connections up at USDA. We can find out more.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I hope it doesn't preclude us being able to get some more if possible. We're going to need it, I think. Thanks.
Okay, any more questions? Dashboard and appendix.
Like Rachel has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, didn't see that. Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay, I was just curious if we got our decision on that. Did we hear if Tri-State got their New Era fund, which wasn't their ERP predicated on receipt of that?
I'm not personally familiar with them being awarded that, and I'm pretty sure that they would have been a lot of publicity around that. So I feel relatively confident the fact that
Good
I
point.
didn't see.
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Graham. That'll be all over the news one way or the other. Anything else before we go take a quick break? Because I'm sure we need it. Okay, then I'm going to say let's try and make this quick. Let's go for a 5-minute break, get coffee, nature break. And we'll start with board action at 10:50. Okay, 10:50, let's fire back up. I'm gonna, as a time management issue, I'm gonna propose an agenda shuffle. We have 4 items now on our board action agenda, and we have about 10 minutes before Matt Larson shows up. So that we don't have to put Matt off, I'd like to get to him right at 11. It does seem like of the 4 board action items, the item D that we added, which is selecting NRECA delegate and alternate can probably get accomplished in 10 minutes. So I'm going to propose that we tackle 5D and then move the rest of the board action to after executive session. Do I have any objections to that agenda modification? Okay, I don't see any, so we're going to go straight into 5D, which was added at the beginning of this meeting, which is a board selection of a delegate and alternate to the September NRECA meeting. I will take either nomination, and honestly, if anyone thinks that we should not do this now, that they're interested but not ready to make a decision, I would entertain that. But I know we do have one interested party for either of those, either delegate or alternate. So at this point, I'll take either nominations or self-nominations for people who would be interested in serving that role for the board. I see Kirsten.
Yeah, I'm interested and willing to serve in either role.
Okay, thank you for, yeah, go ahead. Holly, I see your hand up.
I'd like to nominate Nicole to that position, please.
Okay, Nicole, what are your feelings on that?
I mean, I wish it was San Francisco instead of Sacramento, but I would consider it. I would, if I were to do it, I would want us to spend some time talking about it, like what the objective was. Because yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments in the last week related to that and how LPEA relates to and with NRECA, and some of that could be poignant at the regional meeting. So if you're interested, I will commit to trying to get the board to move in that direction of taking some action on what our role at that meeting might be.
And Ted, can I speak to some logistics just for a second?
Absolutely, Graham.
It's my recollection that because there's a CEO meeting at the same time, we often have the CEO be the alternate to sort of save costs, not sort of duplicate that travel expense of sending both. That not to say that board isn't at its liberty to send a delegate and an alternate if it wants, but just like my recollection is that historically we've considered the CEO to be the alternate for this meeting as a sort of cost saving mechanism. Just putting that out there.
Okay, I think it's a reasonable option for the board to consider. All right, so I do need to hear, Nicole, from you whether you accept that nomination or not.
Yeah, I think contingent upon that conversation, which you said you'd be willing for us to have, then I think it could be worth my time to participate.
Okay. And I guess procedurally, I might propose that we do go ahead and select a delegate and an alternate, and that the alternate might not be on the travel schedule, but the alternate might convert to the travel schedule if the primary delegate were to not be available to make that happen. If something were to happen too close for those travel arrangements to be changed, then Graham's suggestion seems to be a good one, that we will already have a CEO at that meeting and they could serve as the delegate. Tim, something to add?
Yeah, I was named a delegate to one a year or two ago, and it turned out I couldn't make it, and so the CEO was there and was the delegate, and I think that worked really well. So they were the alternate, so they became the delegate, and I think from a cost and expediency point, if the CEO is going to be there, they can be the alternate. And so I would suggest we just we vote on the nomination for the delegate and assume that the alternate is the CEO. Thanks.
Okay, Rachel.
if we're gonna go that route, could we maybe hear from each person who's raised their hand, what their interests are, kind of how they hope to represent? Because otherwise I don't feel like I have an informed vote.
Yep. Fair point, Rachel. So we have Kirsten has indicated interest in being the delegate, and Nicole has accepted a secondary nomination to be the delegate. So Kirsten, you want to give us a spiel on why you want to serve LPEA in that way?
Yeah, sure. I've been to the meetings before and have worked on a couple of trying to get some things changed. Bob Lynch and Jessica and I successfully got something changed at the regional meeting 4 years ago. And that was great. We did that in conjunction with Holy Cross. And it was actually makes it more fun and exciting when you're actually working on something like that. I personally like to go because it's also a great educational opportunity. There's lots of things. So I like to go for that too. But I have some experience. If we're talking about do we really want to be going down this line? Do we want to be putting up more of a battle with NRECA? Then I've had experience in doing that. And that's what I think I would bring to LPEA, and then plus what it would bring to myself. And I think an alternate is totally acceptable because the more people you have there to make cases, if they're not a voting case. So, for instance, you do a lot of lobbying when you're trying to change resolutions. So the more people you have there, so if it was the three of us, and it was the three of us 3 or 4 years ago when Bob, Jessica, and I made that change. So I think having that is really helpful. So I would want to have both a primary and an alternate, and out of time for me. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for the comments. Nicole, your pitch.
Sure. So, I think you guys have seen in my previous report when I went to the national meeting, and then just in the follow-ups when I went through the resolutions, I have some major concerns about our partnership, our participation in NRECA. Not without acknowledging the value that they have added to our ability, like particularly as a new member, when I took their summer school last summer, it was an intensive 4-day course for someone who had zero co-op experience. I thought that was really helpful. So the way I would feel comfortable being a member of this organization that is pretty fundamentally in opposition to some of the things I feel like are important and relevant in the energy transition, I think we have to have a voice at the table, and we need to, I think, be part of that internal change, at least acknowledging that there are other ways to see and be a leader in the co-op sphere. I have found a lot of value too in going to these events and the relationships I've made. Like throughout the CEO selection process, I've been able to reach out to personal contacts of other co-op directors and how they've done things through net metering for references. So I see a ton of value in the face-to-face, going and having a beer after the meetings and getting to know people that I can then reach out to in a professional director kind of way.
Thanks. Anything else from you, Rachel?
Well, just one thought I have hearing the value of bringing extra people. Kirsten's done this before, knows the lobby train. Nicole's obviously got some specific things she wants to work on. Graham's going to be there. And I also know we're underspent in travel and training. So what if Kirsten's our delegate, Nicole's our alternate? So I guess that's what I would propose, and they can learn from each other and work together.
Let's see, to clarify, Rachel, did you make a motion there or a suggestion?
I guess I don't understand process. If I make a motion, or if you make a motion, or if it's a vote. But if it's a motion, I'd move that Kirsten's our delegate, Nicole's our alternate.
I would second that.
Okay, moved and seconded that that Kirsten be our delegate and Nicole be our alternate. And Kohler, you had your hand up. Okay, no, any other discussion on that motion? Okay, seeing none, we'll vote on the motion. To clarify, the motion is Kirsten as the delegate for NRECA and Nicole as the alternate. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, we need to count.
We don't see John Witchell or Joe Lewandowski's videos. Okay, so, yep. Joe, all right, yep. Okay. All right.
Okay, you feel pretty good, Graham. All opposed?
Kohler's opposed. Okay.
I see one. Any abstentions from that vote? I don't see any. So motion passes, and we have that accomplished. And thank you for the candidates for those two positions. Okay, so as indicated, we're modifying the agenda here, and we will go to attorney update next. And I do see Matt. So welcome, Matt. Public session. Go ahead and give us your update.
Thanks, Ted. Nice to see you all. A few quick items. We've been engaged in the Tri-State Electric Resource Plan at the Colorado PUC. That case has settled, and we can get into the details of that settlement in a little more, with more specificity, I think, in executive session. But that case is settled. Evidentiary hearing has been vacated. It was actually supposed to be going on right now as we speak. And can talk through that a little bit more, I think, after we cross over to executive session. So that's the Colorado PUC side. With respect to FERC, not a ton of updates. The sleeving, PPA sleeving negotiations continue as part of the CTP. So that was, bifurcated off, directed into its own settlement process. We had a technical conference the other day with the parties, and we're going to be reconvening for another settlement conference later this summer. So that process, we're in a discovery phase right now, that kind of thing, asking questions, and we're very active in that particular discussion because it does interplay with how the CTP will be implemented. And then the rate case, the formula rate filing that Tri-State made, has not yet been accepted by FERC. There's a lot of pleadings and things like that going around on that. There are some areas of controversy. If you'll recall, Tri-State proposed to have its formula rate go into effect and then send a certain set of discrete items into a settlement judge procedure, so settlement process. That included the non-networked transmission direct assignment that we had a lot of back and forth with Tri-State on in previous rate cases. So FERC has not yet acted on that. So not a lot of activity there. So that's kind of the lay of the land on both the state and the federal side. Can take any questions, or we can jump into the executive session.
Okay, any hands up before we move this into executive session? I don't see any. Then we need a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
I'll take
and just to be clear for the record, that we need to announce the topics of our executive session before we go in. So according to the agenda, the proposed executive session topics are attorney update on FERC and related actions, power supply contract review, and CEO selection committee update.
Okay, so Tim moved, Rachel second to go into executive session for those three topics. Any further discussion on that? Tim, your hand's up.
Yeah, I don't know if this is appropriate for Matt, but if there's any update on the LPEA litigation,
There's not.
Okay, just to make sure.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you.
And Dan Huntington, I saw you kind of raise your hand. You got anything?
No, I thought we were voting.
Okay, perfect, we are. So all in favor of the motion to move into executive session for the 3 topics mentioned? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, then let's move into executive session. Everybody needs to find their link. We will see you on the other side as quickly as possible. Okay, we're back from executive session. There are no board actions coming out of executive session today, so we'll pick up our agenda. As shuffled, we need to go back to agenda item 5, board action. And the first item in board action, and everyone's rolling back into the virtual boardroom here. First item in board action is the Finance and Audit Committee update. And as indicated, we modified that agenda slightly to remove the action required item little 1 from the agenda. So I'll go ahead and turn the mic over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Ted. So as you all probably have read, the report is in the board packet. So there are no recommendations coming, excuse me, coming out of the FAC, any recommendations to the board. The various financials review we've already had. We've had a bit of discussion earlier in the board meeting about the budget update, and I'll just touch on that a little bit, and Patrick will help me, I'm sure, if I need it, if I need to be rescued here or say something wrong. But there were 2 components to the budget update. One was simply an outline of what the 2025 budget process, which is underway, will look like. It's a revamp process with from previous, and it'll have some more granularity, I think is the term that Patrick used, and also an attempt to provide a monthly cash flow against cash flow goals that we hope to set in that 2025 budget. There's really no action there. It's informative. It's a disclosure of what's happening, and it will be on the budget, on the FAC agenda each month until we get to a point where the budget is approved later this year. So that will be something we'll report on in the FAC. If you're interested in that, I encourage any and all board members to attend, or members if they so choose. Patrick also provided an informational update on a forecast of some 2024 unbudgeted expenses. Could be as high as $840,000. This is informational. Nothing is fully set. Some of these are placeholders to account for the potential of what they might be. They are, again, disclosures, and there's no action that it seems is needed at this point, because it's expected the overall 2024 budget will not be exceeded as a result of these. And we did have a good discussion around the, what requires reapproval in terms of a budget versus what doesn't. And really the take of the committee, I would say, is that if it's not taking us out of our operating margin targets, then there's not a need to come back to the board for additional approval. These are all within the scope of staff. We put a budget together, and there's opportunity to move things around, and not, as long as we're not altering that, the expectation of meeting the operating margin on the income statement, then it probably should stay intact. There's also a capital budget that is approved, and if that were to be exceeded, missed mostly in excess, And that would also be a reason to bring it back to the board for discussion, and that is not anticipated at this time. So that's the context. We also had a discussion of retirement of capital credits. And again, there was an expectation that we would perhaps bring a motion or a recommendation for a motion on that. After a good discussion on that, we've decided that we would take this, FAC would take this up again in August with some more information that we're looking at in terms of FIFO, LIFO payments, and some questions around that as outlined in the report, and may provide a recommendation in August, or may wait until later in the year. There was a lot of discussion about maybe this isn't required to be decided until we have clear picture of financials, perhaps as late as November. So, all right, that's my my opining on the explanation of where we got to. So I see a couple of hands up. Rachel, I think you're first.
Great, thank you. Two quick questions. I appreciate and respect the notion of that discussion around at what point does a financial change need to come back to the board. I'm curious if there are any mechanisms by which staff would bring financial changes within a line item to the board. So maybe they're staying within the overall budget, but if a individual, not line item, but like an account. So let's say executive administrative, they're proposing a change that would affect that by over 10%. Are there any mechanisms in place like that where it would come back to you all at the FAC level just to flag it so you're aware?
We discussed that somewhat, and my understanding, and Graham also weighed in a little bit on this, that there is not that kind of guidance in a policy or bylaw that we're required to set a budget, and we have the discretion of when and how we want to revise that. And we have traditionally operated on the basis of the key goal, and I think there is something that was mentioned around that, and I can't remember, it was a policy, but around operating margin goal, target, and whether or not we fall under that, and what steps we might take to bring that back into alignment, because that's fundamentally what will be allocated to the members, and that's our basic obligation. Graham, do you want to add anything to that?
I think some of my basis for that, if you go back historically to our budget resolutions, including last year that we passed that authorized this year's budget, that's largely summarizes what Tim said, that it's sort of like those top line numbers of largely of what our expected margin budget is, right? And that target is. And so it really if we're within meeting that margin target that was authorized in that resolution, we are sort of in line with that resolution.
There's one other aspect, which is the capital items, capital projects and capital items. And those are, there are, and I forget which policy it is, but there is some instruction that we have to follow, policy instruction around that, where if it's beyond a particular level, beyond a particular budgeted level, that we need to bring that back to the board. That was also a change, I think, we made recently, where it used to be just a pure dollar value, and now it is deviation from budget, I believe, in the capital.
It's actually it's a percentage of operating revenue and patronage capital per fiscal year is what the policy is. So it's a bit of a floating target, but we sort of made that as a 0.25% of annual budget operating revenue.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I've just found, I know from an oversight standpoint, sometimes that in a lot of our grant contracts, obviously you can't go over the margins, but they'll just have for the highest line items, if you're deviating, whatever it was, 25% or more of what you proposed, it's just a good flag, so you can explain why.
Could I just say one thing here? We are reporting this, right? It is being disclosed. It comes out at the FAC. We discuss it. We have this oversight being taken place, and we're bringing it to the board, right? It's not like this is bereft of board oversight. It's just a question of to what extent do we as a board have to reapprove something which really can slow down and perhaps negate the progress we might be making towards other goals and so forth, right? Like strategic goals, right?
Yeah.
So clarification, that's all. Thank you. A good
Thanks.
question.
My one quick other request, just because there are some shifts to budget process, which sound like really positive shifts, but because our budget process has changed every year for the last 5 years, is there a way just to get a roadmap, since it's the talk of the town this meeting, but just a kind of upcoming dates and what actions or what steps are taken when, just so we can look out and anticipate that.
You're talking
Specific
about
to the board, specific to the, sorry?
You're talking about the 2025 budget? Is it?
Yeah, because it's like we approve the capital projects and then we approve the and then we approve just if it helped me.
Those things will be forthcoming, but they were not ready at this juncture. And yes, they will definitely be shared. And there is a discussion, and the FAC will work with Patrick to make sure that that process, as we've had in the past, and the communication of that process and those timelines are made available in a timely manner.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Joe. I think Joe's, at least in my lineup, you're next.
Yeah, a couple questions about the quarterly contractor report.
That's not something we discussed at all at the FAC.
Yeah, I just want to know when I should ask that question.
I think to sort of at the end, after the reports come out, sort of around item 9.
Okay.
Kirsten, I think you're up.
Yeah, thanks. This is concerning the.
Hard to hear you again, Kirsten. At least it is for me.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. This is concerning the change in budget. I'm glad you guys had that discussion of when does it need to get raised up. In my mind, if it stays within the same department or maybe even within the same strategic goal, it doesn't have to get raised up. But just because it comes in under budget, because we can really trim the operating margin, trim the margins that we're planning on having and still be within budget, but have gone over in what we meant to do strategically and such. So I think there is, I think it's important to be conscious of this, and I really appreciate this report. And I was surprised to hear that this is ongoing. That's just the first I remember seeing it. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it is in the July FAC Google Drive. So I think it's fabulous to see, but I'm not sure that we have seen it, and I'm not sure that it should be just if it's within the budget, because we can take an entire left turn, trim budget someplace, put budget someplace else, and say, well, we approved the budget, so we're okay. And so I'm concerned about our responsibility as a board on the budget if we're not at least looking at these, saying, yep, that sounds good, especially when the board is referred to on one of those items, which it said the board thinks this is a good idea, and I don't know where the board thought it was a good idea. You want me to quote that one for you?
You have the floor. You can.
Okay, I'll quote it for you. So it's the board views this as a method for meeting our power supply requirements, and it does say a specific vendor, so I don't want to mention that, but it's about a capacity study. And if the board did view that, then I can see why it would be kind of an approval of changing the budget, or moving it around. I don't know when that was done, and I would like to know when that was done.
So I won't speak on behalf of the staff because they can do that on their own. But, you know, I do recall a long and lengthy discussion the board engaged in around net metering. And also when we indicated the sort of red line areas of solar, rooftop solar availability or access or whatever the term is. And there were multiple discussions around how do we get a handle on the ability to, you know, understand the capacity that we have or might not have or don't have with regards to net metering availability and red zones, right? That's my recollection of where the board clearly expressed in the discussion, various board members, that this was a critical issue and that we also would need some insight into. And I don't think it called for a study per se or use of a contract or anything, but that is the solution that staff came up with. They needed tools, and they're saying, sort of like, okay, you need to put that pole in the ground here, and we need a special tool to do so. They go and get a tool, you know?
So maybe this is just a bad choice of wording, because it says that this is a method for meeting the power. And I think certainly the board gave things a fix this. We can't go forward without it. So this is a board priority or something, but I don't think this particular method, which is how I'm reading that sentence. And
so I don't know, Kirsten. I mean, it's the fact we're looking at it and we're reporting and giving oversight and so forth, right? So from my perspective, I'm quite loath to be able, you know, we looked at it, we looked at the budget implications. We think that they're intact. We're going to still meet the goals, and that the staff is saying we need a tool. We're going to go do this, right? It is not a capital tool. It's a operating expenditure, and it's within the context of what we think they're able to do. And I'm loath to then say, well, you know, you need a different tool. I don't like that method. That's not my job as a director on the board or a person on the FAC. So
agreed.
If we want to open that as a discussion, I don't think it's, you know, the fact that needs to take that up at this point.
So I think we're in violent agreement here. We're saying, yeah, we told them to fix it. This line here about the board views this as a method for meeting. The board has no idea if this is a method for meeting it. Staff is saying, hey, you told us to do this. We're doing it. But I don't want it to have the board's name associated with this particular method. Again, we're in violent agreement on we shouldn't be in at the method point on that one. So we're good.
Yeah. Kirsten, do you have a proposed resolution for that problem that you're stating? How do we fix what you're concerned with?
I guess the question is to staff on the forecasted unbudgeted expenses, where you say the board views this as a method for meeting our power supply requirements. Did you get specific to this method? Did you get specific guidance from the board to do this? Or is this just how you decided in a very good way to meet the board's requirement, which was, how do we fix this? Is my question understood, Graham?
I'm just sort of trying to track down the language. Can you tell me what what page we're on the board packet?
Yeah, it's on
It's
page
not in the
one. No,
board.
it's
It's
not in the board
in
packet.
it's a document that was provided at the FAC. It is in the FAC folder in Google Drive.
Yeah.
And it's unbudgeted expenses 2024 or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think
the list,
yeah.
basically, and there's a notation in the list.
Mm-hmm. And so I think, I mean, I would say that from what I've heard from Tim, I think he's summarized what staff's view on this is really well. And like you said, we're sort of in violent agreement with this, right? That this was our attempt to go forward and meet the board's needs. And I guess, and I will say this too, in full transparency, you know, I was not able to attend the FAQ. I had a conflict, scheduling conflict. I might see if Patrick is able to speak to this as well. I think he was sort of part of preparing this document, maybe more than I was. So,
Pearson, it was essentially the latter of the choices that you offered. It's staff's interpretation on how to solve a problem that the board presented to it.
And as it should be. Super. I super appreciate that. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick.
Other questions on the FAC report? Anything else?
Van Morrison and similar artist station.
So Siri decided to chime in back there. So
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe she was listening to our executive session. I hope not.
Thanks. Kirsten's hand is still up, though.
Oh, Kirsten, sorry. Thank you. I didn't see that.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Different question on the Form 990, the draft, which is it's in the facts folder. I would encourage everybody to take a look at that. I did have some specific questions which I will hold and send to Patrick, but some of them don't. Yeah, so I do have those specifics, and I'll look for those answers. Thank you.
So just to touch on that 990 for a moment, we did discuss that since you have brought it up. It's a good point that you know, this is a tax return. It contains factual information. Factual information generally isn't open to interpretation. If you find a mistake or what you think is a mistake, or you want some clarification, that's great. But I don't think we discussed and do not believe that the board has an interest or stake in changing things, given that they are just results, right? They're facts. So.
Yeah, okay, agreed. And this isn't about changing this one. It is about changing the future, which also requires changing how we report the W-2s on the because that's the 990s. So that's why I was taking it off. Again, though, it is factual. It's another way of looking at the same slices of information, and that's where I think other board members might benefit from at least looking at it and saying, oh, now that I look at it this way, I understand that. So that's why I'm recommending folks take a look at it. Not because I want everybody to jump and do typo corrections and stuff. Thank you.
And that also is in the same FAQ July folder on the Google Drive. So people are welcome to look at it. If you do have questions, you've got a little time. It'll be filed in October. So
anything else for Tim, FAC? Great. Thank you very much, Tim, and the whole FAC and staff. Let's move on to the update from update and potential action from Committee on Policies. John Lee, please.
All right, in front of you is action required motion to approve. If we get a motion in a second to approve 129, we'll open up discussion. We do have some discussion with some additional inputs to it that I'll open up.
So move.
Moved by Joe, seconded by Kohler, and yeah, and thirded by Rachel. All those, okay, we have a motion and a second. We'll move into discussion. Can we put up the resolution?
The red line or the?
Well, yeah, what I was going to point out is in your packet is policy 129, code of ethics and conduct. The first one is the red line that we've been working on for several months. It shows those specific inputs that many of you have given us, the answers to them or the incorporation of them, or an answer to them without them being incorporated for one reason or another, where the committee thought that it was satisfied in another paragraph or stood along by itself. If the red line with those months of changes is challenging to read, or you'd like to see the final product, what we're voting on, the second list, it's gone from 11 pages down to 9 pages. Those 9 pages without red lines, and as we are going to be voting on it, are in the second one on policy 129, however you prefer to see those. We did have comments come in between our committee meeting and the committee recommending that this move forward for approval. And so I would open that up to, I believe that there might have been more than 2, but I saw Rachel and Tim's comments to this. Would either of you like to, Rachel, your hands up?
John, I'd just like to say beforehand, Kohler pointed out some typographical errors that occurred moving from the red line to the clean copy, and would just incorporate those. They're not changing any substance, just catching typos. So we'll incorporate the typos that Kohler caught.
All right, Rachel?
Thanks, John Lee, and thanks to the policy committee. I thought the red line changes looked great and cleaned things up. I always miss the policy, the process, which is not on me, it's not on you. So I apologize for the tardy entry. But I was just gonna recommend accepting the red line changes as they are and adding in an additional bullet point under section 2 policy. I sent an email with it, and it was just to kind of blatantly not blatantly, that's the wrong word choice, but call out respect and non-discrimination in our code of conduct and ethics policy. And so there are just 2 sub-bullet points under that: respect for individuals, treat all individuals with dignity, fairness, and respect, regardless of position, background, or opinions, and non-discrimination. And I know we like to assume that is understood. I guess my rationale for this is I was looking at other people's code of conduct and ethics policies and saw those stated pretty obviously, and didn't see anything similar to that in our policy 129, red lines or no. And the second is just, some historic issues that have come up on the board, and without having anything codified, was really hard. There was no accountability mechanism, which made it very challenging, even when you tried to follow the code of conduct protocol that had been in place. So
if I could speak to that for 1 second, right? Our statement of non-discrimination is the United States Department of Agriculture's mandated statement of non-discrimination. It is located at the end of our bylaws. So it is sort of incorporated into our bylaws, which are a superior document to these policies. That's where that particular thing is located. Not to sort of talk about, I know you'd had a mention of the treating people with respect, things of that nature, that we don't have a policy on that. You're correct, but we do have a very robust and specific non-discrimination policy that is incorporated into our bylaws.
Great, I can happily pull that out if that's covered elsewhere, and to your point, supersedes. Yeah, maybe then just a bullet point on respectful conduct.
And Graham, could you coach a bit here on like the parliamentary procedure, Robert's rules here? So we have a motion to approve what's here. We're having discussion. I feel like maybe what Rachel is proposing is an amendment to the motion. Can you talk us through that?
Yep. So I think we would do that. So it sounds like Rachel would be suggesting a motion to amend the policy as presented, right? So as the main motion is currently under consideration is to adopt the policy as presented, including typographical errors that were noted after it was initially published, right? But non-substantive changes. So what Rachel is proposing is a substantive change. So it would be, she would make a motion to interlineate the red line. And I'm sorry, Rachel, I'm going to take a second and pull up your email to the committee from this.
Well, here's what I might propose. We would accept this as put forward by the committee, or if we've got good elements and more than even just Rachel's, we might even, I believe we have another comment by Tim, if we're going to have those, let's not approve this as a board. It will go back to the policy committee. We'll work on it for another month and work to get it back, as opposed to not having a clean copy to see what it is that we're trying to approve, and then we
I appreciate that. I would say as a parliamentary matter then, right, I would say that the subsidiary motion would be a motion to refer back to committee. And so then the main motion would be tabled while the policy is referred back to committee. Is that and that makes a lot of sense board time wise. And we have a committee on policy that's designed to handle these things and have those meetings. It makes a lot of sense procedurally to sort of do that. So do we have a motion to refer this back to committee for further discussion? Let's see, Kirsten's hand up. So
Dan?
Kirsten, okay.
I'll move to table this, refer it back to policy committee to get a clean red line and get the bylaw and the policy back in line with what is being proposed.
Second.
So now that's a subsidiary motion. That is what we would be debating, just whether or not to refer it back to committee. Any discussion on whether or not to refer it back to committee? I don't see any. Should we proceed to a vote, Chairman Compton?
All right. All those in favor of referring back to committee, raise your hand or say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Policy 129 will be referred back to committee and brought forward at that time later. Ted, back to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you, John. Item C, the 314 property lease and potential action on that. I'm going to let Graham, you drive that one if you would.
Yeah, thank you. So if some of the directors might recall, last year we brought the idea of leasing our property on County Road 314 to the board as it incurs a lot of cost for us for vacant property in terms of property maintenance, weed control, rodent control, things of that nature. We don't have a lot of commercial opportunity for it now. When we brought it up last year, the board indicated that they would prefer a more competitive bid process rather than the process we had sort of negotiated with a neighbor for a lease, and the board felt that wasn't sort of in keeping with the cooperative principles and wanted to come back as a more competitive bid. So we've restructured this as a more competitive bid. See, Tim has his hand up first.
Yeah, I move to approve resolution 2024-08, delegating authority to the CEO or interim CEO, as the case may be, to negotiate and enter a real property lease.
Second.
Moved and seconded, resolution 2024-08. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All in favor of approving resolution 2024-08, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 Kohler has a hand up too, man.
Yeah, go ahead, Kohler.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite get to it before we voted, but I think
right.
it would be good in second whereas if we could put what county that is in.
Yep.
So it's not confusing.
Yep, we can amend that. I like that. Yep, we'll take noted.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. I'm just gonna retake that. We're halfway through. I'm just gonna retake that vote. So with that modification suggested by Kohler, now all in favor of approving resolution 2024-08, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Or abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Thank you very much. Sorry, getting back to the agenda. Okay, that closes out the board action section. Obviously, we'll skip past the things that have already been accomplished, except for lunch break. We'll just skip past that anyway. And we are to section 9, reports. Attorney report is first. Graham?
I just refer everyone to my written report and take whatever questions you might have.
Anybody with questions for Graham on his attorney report? Seeing none, and moving on to the director reports. In any of those reports need clarification from the reporters, or are there any questions specifically for those reports? Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, this is a question around the Roundup report.
Mm-hmm.
So it says total Roundup assets. It gives a number that I'm not sure how that's calculated. I think I've asked this before, and if so, I apologize for not remembering exactly. But it's a large number considering. Yeah, I'm just not quite sure where it comes from. So it could be answered later too, if you need the total assets. And then also in that is reserves have come down a lot, and I know that was an intent. Just wonder if there's a floor that you're trying to achieve or maintain, I should say, because at this rate there will be no reserves pretty soon. So, and it's a question, not a criticism or anything.
Yeah. So we've been trying to bleed the reserves, so to speak, and there is no floor, but I mean, you know, we discuss it with the other Roundup board members. You know, is the educational, which you can see on the educational, is getting close. How close do we want to get it before we decide how we're going to do that? So if you can see, we do have less assets on the educational side, and we are getting through, but there is no stated floor. But the discussion is just like the discussion here. It is a board of volunteers, and they are concerned that we don't hit too much of a floor. Anything you would add to that, Nicole?
Sure. In regards to the first question, Tim, I have also been told and don't remember the material point I would make is that it is liquid. I remember that. It's in a separate column, but that is all. That's not an asset that, you know, would have some kind of lead time that we'd have to, in order to make it happen. That is also something we could draw from immediately.
Okay. Well, if you get more info or you recall better and you want to share that, at least I'm interested in that. So, and I don't know. I'd be interested to see if you do arrive at some level of reserve that you feel is good, because, you know, we have used reserves out of this in the past for sort of emergency events that have happened within either LPEA or Florida County or service territory. And so if we go too low, maybe we don't have that capability, right? So things like fire or even a pandemic and these kinds of things. So in helping in the community. So again, it's an independent board, but that's just a concern that I have. So thank you.
Yeah, and Tim, we have discussed that. When we had our strategic meeting, it was like, for that exact reason, if there's a pandemic and we want to have, you know, and wildfire specifically, we talked about, there was just no consensus. So I'm not sure that we'll bring it up at the next meeting, both get clarification on what those assets are for
Correct.
Roundup, and then also to see if there's an appetite for the board to set a floor.
Great. Thanks. Rachel, next question or comment.
I was just gonna fill in some historic context from my rememberings on the Roundup board, because that question comes up all the time. Wait, what is this number? It's such a weird number. And if I recall, it's the roundup monies. So the ed funds all come from retired capital credits. It's a different pot of money. And then the roundup funds are the roundup every month that transpires. And part of that, yeah, and that I think goes to those particular grants. And there was just a long-term pooling of that now gets drawn down. There's like a savings account that had piled high for a bit. That's what I remember. And then to the other point you made about special projects, I know that was actually something we had looked into right before I left as one of those strategic items. And it is just for historic sake to know the pandemic relief monies. There's one big piece of roundup that kind of gets lost in the shuffle between it being governed by its own foundation board and our governing board. And that was the piece around retirement of capital credits every year. Oh God, and I think it is the retirement, not the allocation, but unclaimed, excuse me, retirement of unclaimed capital credits. Every year the board votes on that and allocates monies to certain things. There's the scholarships, like we vote on one line item that, if I recall, is scholarships, the roundup board portion, and some other things kind of lumped in one. And the pandemic money came from a particular vote in that part of our work at the board. So that's just a tool to keep in mind, because at least for me, every time that vote comes up, I'm like, oh gosh, right, were there any other like special projects or areas that we were looking at where we wanted to set some funds aside?
Thanks, Rachel. Kirsten?
Yeah, I have a question on the CREA report. May I?
Go for it.
Holly, is there any discussion going on at CREA about inviting non-cooperatives into CREA?
Yeah, I saw that in your question, your email. There was some discussion on that, but that was held during the part of the meeting that I did not attend. It's possible David might have a little more color on that one.
No, they had mentioned that, and really, if you're not I know some people have gotten out of CREA, you really need to be a paying member.
Yeah, I think it's the associate membership, right, that they're talking about.
Yeah.
I've seen
The sub membership, yeah, but a full membership. Go ahead, Graham. I'm
in the managers meetings, we've talked a lot about associate membership, right? And so like CFC is an associate member, or Western United is an associate member, and they come and report. And so there is some discussion on whether so there is a generation and transmission association that serves most of the co-ops in Colorado, and they are a member, but there is also other power suppliers that are serving other co-op members, and should they be extended associate memberships is, I think, a lot of where that's going. But, I mean, it's sort of like, what is associate membership? What do they have the rights to do? The bylaws allow for associate membership. What are the parameters of that? The bylaws just sort of say you can have associate members, right? And I think there's a lot of discussion, both at the manager level and the board level, of what does that mean? And so, I'll be in Montrose in a week or two for the managers meeting, and I know that's on the managers meeting agenda to discuss as well.
That was not on the August 29th meeting, though. That was not a topic of discussion.
I don't have a horse in this race. It came up at the Tri-State meeting, and Tri-State was vehemently against it, but I'm ignorant on the topic. So you might want to get up to speed, because it's sounding more contentious than you may think it is, Holly. So it's a warning.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss what I'm familiar with from my communications on a manager to manager level. Holly, feel free to.
Okay. Thank you.
That's with me.
Okay.
Tim, what you got?
Yeah, Tim.
A couple questions for CREA. First, thanks a lot for the good report. I always like reading your insights and good reports. I'm curious, and maybe you can't talk about this, but there seemed like there was a kind of a nomination tug between two people who were looking to be CFC director, board of director, And I just was curious, you know, what was, in your mind, what was the differentiation between these two in terms of why the incumbent took it up versus the one who challenged?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting interviews. The first one was the incumbent. And he came in and he was really nice about like how he's learned things and he's developed these relationships and he's working really hard. And he had kind of a really nicely pleasant interview. And then the second one came in swinging for the fences. And it was kind of an interesting interview because it was almost an attack on the incumbent. And kind of, quite honestly, that was a turnoff for me. So I guess you can kind of guess from what I'm saying who I voted for. I don't know if that helps any, but
yeah, okay. So not sure what was behind all that.
it was interesting, yeah.
Okay. I mean, CFC is, you know, I don't know to what extent that they get involved in any of our discussions around our borrowing and so forth at the board level, but I was just curious about how that might affect, you know, our relationship with CFC. Probably not much. The other was the executive director report in terms of an indication that the net metering working group seems to be, I guess, reaching some consensus. And Mr. Singer, in your report, stated that he believes the working group does understand cooperative concerns.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, I guess like Graham said, you know, if you've seen one co-op, you've seen one. So how to know that that person has really absorbed all those or how they're being reflected in this working group, and whether they would be equal to what we have as concerns and or not is, I just wanted to get your estimation on how well you think CREA will represent perhaps the concerns that LPA has in that group, which I think will probably end up having some impact on legislation that will affect net metering in Colorado.
Yeah, that's the net metering question has been really contentious, and it really kind of feels like you know, there's a real push and pull between the industry, the solar industry itself, and you know, the cooperative interests and everything. It feels like almost like herding cats. And from what Mr. Singer was talking about, there is some consensus starting to form, it looks like, around off ramps, you know, how to define, you know, when that 1-to-1 ratio would, you know, not be in effect. Some grandfathering in of the systems that are already in effect, but it would not, from what I'm reading, from what Mr. Singer was saying, that it's not going to be an indefinite grandfathering is what they're kind of settling towards. He believes that the working group does understand the cooperative positioning because past Governor Hickenlooper, or no, I'm sorry, Ritter, what is one of the primary components of that working group. And so apparently there's some kind of a working relationship with Mr. Ritter and Mr. Singer that he was basing his opinion that they do understand the cooperative viewpoints to the best that you can distill down 22 different viewpoints. And that apparently the state of Colorado is, from what I understand, is requiring a final like recommendation on July 31st. So that is coming right down the pipeline. That's the last that I remember recalling a date being set for that information to come out. So I went all around in circles. Did I answer your question somewhat?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that was illuminating. And I guess my concern is to understand what that consensus might be and how it stacks up against LPA's potential interest. Is there a conflict? Is it congruent? And what level of influence might we have if we want to exercise it before that deadline? So I'm not sure that we can, but
Yeah, I mean, if I could speak to it a little bit to Tim, my familiarity with the people that are sort of representing the co-ops, right? When Executive Director Singer says he believes the working group understands cooperative concerns, like Brian Hannigan from Holy Cross is one of the primary points of contact on this, and I would say that we, in general, right, like you've seen one co-op, but we have, I think, a lot of alignment with Holy Cross on net metering points of view. So, I mean, I would say that is probably where a lot of that point of view is coming from. Also, I think Mark Gabriel from United is pretty well involved, and you know, I think we're not in a dissimilar position from United in the application of net metering. I mean, I think I can talk to you about the details of what makes net metering different for them than for us offline, but I mean, that is probably the best summary I can give you of believing the working group understands cooperative concerns, right? You know, I think, and certainly I've seen the communications that they've had with Governor Ritter and the Senator for New Energy Economy, or whatever it is that he runs out of Colorado State, that's sort of serving as kind of a special master to this project. And I can probably get you copies of what some of that communication looks like if you'd like to review it for yourself.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Maybe there's others that would like it as well.
If any directors would like to
see
see
the potential of really affecting our net metering policies and our, you know, maybe some of that's good, maybe some of it's not, I don't know. But it sure seems like the way this is going is creating a change in the net metering landscape for Colorado. And I just feel like at the moment we're kind of along for the ride. We're not the engineer in the locomotive at this point. And do we want to be, or do we not want to be? And I don't have enough information to know at this point. So maybe Dan Harms, do you have any sense of this at all?
Just been taking in the information as it comes at this point, looking for anything that would cause concern, but we just sort of, not exactly really invited to actively participate in some of these. You know, it was a select set of co-ops, and we've been providing that feedback and given some things to Brian Hannigan, as far as statistics on us. That's been it at this point.
Okay. Maybe I shouldn't be so concerned, but if you have info, I'd be happy to look at it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Kirsten, your hand's up.
How I read Kent's concern is that how co-ops deal with it versus how IOUs deal with it. And frequently, Colorado likes to do stuff because they're really going after Excel. And it can inadvertently affect cooperative structure negatively. So I was reading it of the cooperative voice isn't not understanding the structures of cooperatives and how different rate structures can affect them differently than it can affect IOUs is what it was, and that needs to get better represented. Holly, does that sound right? As opposed to how us 22 deal with it, it's how do co-ops in general deal with it?
I'm sorry, I mostly heard you. You're saying something about the cooperative versus IOU difference.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Holly. So I think it's more about how co-ops will be affected by this versus how IOUs will be affected by it. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different. Co-ops tend to try to fight to be out of the regulation of the states. And so they're always trying to say, hey, this doesn't go for us. And I don't know if that's what he's trying to do, is make sure that it's not going to have an effect on co-ops, because it should be more on IOUs. And I don't know if this is where it's headed, but that's how I read it, that he's trying to make that distinction more than what do the 22 of us think. It's what do cooperative in general, not want to be state regulated, think.
I think that's a small piece of it because it generally is, Kirsten, but whether that's a driver in this in this particular topic, I don't get that sense. So since I'm already up, the only other thing that I would add that was not in my report is Tim Coleman did retire from CREA to move on to a different position. And on a personally, from my perspective, I think that's going to be a pretty big loss for CREA.
He's the lobbyist, right?
I don't know. I guess you could call him lobbyist, but he's more of a governmental relations is I think what his title was. And the thing that I really liked about him is how he knew when to hit the reins and he knew when to pull back on the reins. He really was very, very good at reading the legislators and figuring out, when to spend our social capital and when not to. So like I said, I think that's a pretty good sized loss.
Thanks for that update, Holly. Any updates we need to hear about from Western United, and any questions for Western United or Tri-State?
Yeah, Kirsten had a question that on her email. So in the August meeting, they're going to do a vote for the new people on the board, but it's going to be a voice vote because the president, vice president, and secretary remains the same. The treasurer, Jock Fleming, put his name in the hat, and he was the only one unopposed for treasurer. So the treasurer will be Jock as long as the voice vote is approved.
And that's not something you want, Dave? You want to get into the hierarchy at WUE?
I wouldn't mind, but I know I couldn't go up against Jock.
Yeah, not this year. Okay.
Not
Well,
this
let us
year.
know. Okay.
But yes, I mean, I would like to move up, but a man's got to know his limitations, and Jock's been around, and yes, thank you, Kirsten. And that's it for WUE.
Thanks. Anything else in the director reports section?
Is this where I can ask about the quarterly, or are we still moving on?
This makes sense, Joe. I mean, we'll end the director's report section and move into any just additional comments. So go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of questions on the quarterly contractor report. I think one for Graham, one probably for Jerry. There's architectural expense listed in there, and I'm assuming this has to do with ideas about the new building. I thought that was on hold, so I'm just wondering what's going on with that.
Elizabeth, do you want to speak to that?
Absolutely. We had engaged with SEH, and we did in fact put the building on hold, but we had started some projects that we believe and that they advised us on we could complete so that we could shelve the project. So we just finished our soils testing, and we've got a complete package that's now we can pull off the shelf and dust off in the future. We also are doing a remodel just to gain some more office space. We are out of offices, and we are to rework the old call center and 2 of the current office spaces kind of in the front of the in the lobby area, and we'll hopefully come out with a net of 4 offices in the back and move some people into a shared office space up front. So there's some additional expenses due to that remodel to gain office space.
Great. And for Jared, I always like to touch on the fire mitigation. I don't know if everybody saw that Excel's talking about needing $1 billion, I don't know, the next 5 years or something for fire mitigation, fire safety. I just wanted to ask Jerry, boy, there's a lot. Quarterly was pretty, I mean, I'm sure it's within budget, but I was kind of surprised how much, I think it's close to $800,000 on the 2 contractors that are doing that fire mitigation work. And I just want to ask you, Jerry, if, I guess generally how that's coming along, and will we need to, continually increase this kind of budget I know this is speculative, but just kind of wanting to get your thoughts because it's continues to be a big deal.
So VM West is actually, that part of it is our part of the capital work project itself. So those don't hit our expense budget at all. But as for the other contractors, what we're doing is we're trying to work with La Plata County and the U.S. Forest Service to identify subdivisions that are in high fire risk areas. And we are trying to essentially do the same thing, regain our line clearances from ground to ceiling. One is to help with evacuation routes, because if something happens where they can't escape their subdivisions, it can pose a really big threat. We are working to get a bunch of grants right now with the Forest Service to complete a lot of this work, because everybody's fears are the same. As for our budget line, it's not even close to that much. Would I like it to be? Potentially, but the work that is involved it's massive. It takes a lot of people and a lot of machinery and a lot of planning and time. And I don't know if we have the capacity locally to do that. So currently we're going to keep things the way they are, and see what kind of grants and funding we can get outside of our own budgets.
Okay. And then things like, you know, all the undergrounding work, like out at Turtle Lake and other places. I mean, that's essentially fire mitigation too, right? Fire and reliability. Yeah.
Correct. And we do, we do attribute those to our fire mitigation, even though they are part of our capital projects. But a lot of them have changed from being just overhead jobs to underground, such as the Vicedo project, Turtle Lake, and others.
Okay. Yeah. And we need to let people know about that, because I think fire is always on everyone's mind these days. Great. Thanks.
David, go ahead.
No, I just want to say thank you to Jerry, Graham. I know how important the fire mitigation is. In my past life, it was really the tree trimming budget, and it was high wind and storms, just like you said with that 90 outages. If you cut it or don't pay attention, you're going to end up like Centerpoint in Houston. It was only a Category 1 hurricane. There's still people after 2.5 weeks out of power. My brother-in-law, both brother-in-laws have generators at their house, Generacs, and if they didn't, they'd be without air conditioner, etc. So again, I appreciate that, and I understand using the grants and everything else in our neighborhood, we're doing that. In our last meeting, some of those tree trimming experts, their timeline's 3 years out. So I do understand that constraint you have. So keep up the good work that y'all are doing, and don't forget it. I appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, appreciate that, David. Anybody else have anything before we adjourn? I just mentioned that I got several text messages. Some board members had to drop right at 2. So if it looks a little smaller than it did before, they gave notice and had to take off. Anything before we go? I just want to say thank you very much for all of your efforts and contributions, and I think we're really moving this thing ahead quite well. Appreciate your time today, and meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
See you.